Welcome back. This is Arise News. You're watching the morning show with me, Biola Labi, and Victoria Peppel. And joining us is that time of the morning again for Yemisi Adegoke to go through the headlines with us. So Yemisi, what is going on in the world?
Morning. Well, we're starting off with This Day, and one of their lead stories is about the travel ban that's been imposed by President
Surprise,
Buhari.
surprise.
Yeah, of course. So 50 high-profile, as yet unnamed people suspected of corruption have been restricted from leaving the country. So there's been a massive, massive conversation that's been garnered by this. Some people are saying it's great that the presidency are coming out and stepping out against corruption, but others are saying that it's a slide towards totalitarianism, that because apparently, even though we don't know who all the people on the list, people are saying it's a very partisan list, but we obviously don't know who those people are yet. But big debate on this. What do you guys think?
I mean, we brought it up actually with our last panel. They also, some people felt it was draconian. Some people felt that that the legality of it is still up in the air because. But the fact that this announcement was made, one of our guests felt like it was just propaganda. I think what the danger in this type of announcement in this list is that as you're at the airport, you're now looking at people to see who might not be able to get on the plane. But I also think that this just sort of also creates that society of where people are now sort of suspicious of everyone. And I think that's really where people feel like there is a bit of an Orwellian type of thing going on here.
I mean, I think it is quite strange. I mean, just to sort of make this announcement, not name anybody. It just seems, the timing of it as well just seems a little...
Yeah, I do think that it's going to be a big problem because an executive order put in 50 people. I mean, it reduces the quality of their lives. Honestly, because if they had to travel...
Well, luckily we don't know who they are.
Yes, luckily.
Right?
But, you see,
but if you know who you are,
because
if you're under investigation,
the way things go, a few names will slip out.
Yes, that is true.
And so when you talk about the credibility of the person can't leave the country for, I mean, even if it were very important, I wonder how far this executive order would go. So it reduces the quality of the life. And some people say it infringes all the rights of these 50 people. So is that...
Because basically they're under investigation, they're not guilty, they're fully guilty. I honestly feel like, I mean, I think that rightly so, this is part of, I think, a wider communication issue that we're going to start to see these type of things with elections coming up.
Especially if, there's a reason behind it, as one of our guests said, just trying to look good, like you're fighting corruption and all of that. I mean, but I think that for the people, I wonder what step they would take at this point, because, you can't put me on a no-flight list and probably endanger my business, my reputation,
I have
all of that,
so international businesses and so on. And it's also, I mean, because we don't know the people as well, I mean, if it is a partisan list, then that opens up a whole other sort of can of worms. Are these even politicians? Are they just businessmen? There are a lot of questions. It'll be interesting to see how it develops.
And it's, I mean, the challenge you also have is that it just sort of creates another, it's a distraction. So once again, we're talking about something that is not issue-based towards the election. So
very true.
Let's not be distracted.
Eyes on the ball.
So funny that you would say elections, actually. The next story by This Day, they have created a hypothetical map on what would happen if the election held today, who would win based on that. And it's a non-scientific
it's just if things happen today. But I think it's important to put all the caveats in. If things happen today, but at the end of the day, it's a long way to election.
Absolutely.
Anything can happen tomorrow. So, but if it happened today.
So they're saying that there are some clear states like Plateau, Benue, Adamawa, which will likely go to Atiku. Likewise, Kano, Sokoto, and Katsina will likely go to Buhari. But then they've also done a list of states that are too close to call, which includes Oyo, Lagos, Niger, and Ondo. So they're saying that, the final result will obviously depend on turnout, spread of the vote, etc. But I mean, typically we do have quite low voter turnout in Nigeria. I think in 2015 it was just over 40% of people came out to vote. So
do we expect that to change?
I mean, if you look at
PVC
exactly the list
out there.
Well, I mean, even the list.
I'm not sure.
You don't think, like, with all the PVC campaigns?
It's one thing for you to pick up your PVC. It's another thing for you to turn up at the poll.
Because it's usually Nigeria doesn't sort of run on those days.
It doesn't,
yeah.
No, but you know, the process is so tedious.
That's the thing people
to vote. That's why people
about.
actually stay away from the polling booth. And if we look at how Osun did, can that be a yardstick for how the country will respond when it's time for the elections?
I don't think the turnout of Osun was that big either.
But I've been hearing about, I think there was voter intimidation in Osun.
Yes. That's also true.
Yes, and that has to be dealt with on a larger scale by the time we get into the general elections.
So your prediction is that we'll stay at the 40%?
We could climb a few percentages up, but I don't, unless something happens. Because unless something happens, because what keeps people away? People don't trust the system. They say if I vote anyway, whoever turns up will turn up to be president, and my vote doesn't matter. So there has to be a conscious effort to build trust across board. And with what happened in Osun State and the interpretations of how everything went down, it doesn't instill trust in the Nigerian electorate.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we need to make sure people go out to vote because for these states that are too close to call, it is going to be
very important.
That's going to make a difference.
So on to the Punch, and there's a piece in here about Buhari, the president's comments on religious leaders who he has advised not to engage in partisan politics. He said this at an interfaith conference recently, and he said that clerics that involve themselves in politics risk losing public respect. But given the importance of religion and religious leaders in Nigeria, is that a practical...
Who's the president's running mate?
It's a very good one. Very good one.
Yes, but I think that I think Victoria has said it all. Actually, that's pretty.
That's a good one. I do think that it's an interesting thing to say. He did say that people that are religious leaders should focus on getting their congregations to look at manifestos and to think issue-based as opposed to thinking of because my pastor says so or because my imam says so.
We do know some unfulfilled promises as we 3 years later, so...
That's
I think all over the world, clerics do get involved in politics. I'm not sure that you can tell people, because they are still citizens, but I think that that's just going to happen.
Yeah, probably. So there's another story in Punch here which is talking about the scarcity of Naira notes. So I'm sure you guys have experienced getting a really dirty, horrible, torn, battered Naira notes. Yes. So they're saying that this is being boosted by currency hawkers who are actually selling notes to people. And, the CBN has declared this war against the abuse of the Naira, so spraying and hawking and selling. These are all now punishable offences. But some Naira hawkers are getting around this by using POS machines. So people that want to buy the Naira notes from them will pay them by POS. That's how they're sidestepping detection. Exactly. But apparently, even though this is illegal, they're saying that it's actually a very lucrative business. They have an umbrella organisation, an association. It's quite an organised thing here.
So okay, let me just try to get this straight. I get to a party and I need 200 Naira to spray. I need 200 Naira notes to spray. So I take my card and say, hey, look, give me this many notes. And do they charge me a little exchange fee?
Yes, I think they do. That's how they're making their profit. Yes.
Oh, actually, they get paid from the POS.
Yes, they'll get paid from the POS. If you want so many, there's a reduction in what they give you because some of it is theirs to keep.
Sure.
But it's interesting. Given that
I love enterprising Nigerians. Nigerians will just always find a way around.
They'll always find a way, and I just find that very interesting. But it's curious how now the CBN is going to be able to crack down on this, because even though they're trying to, last week when we spoke about the clampdown on spraying, they're deploying agents to be around parties and so on.
This isn't the first time we've heard it, though. This isn't the first time. We hope that this is enforceable.
That's always the issue, isn't it?
Yes, number one. Number two, having people at parties. It's almost like having Kai come to your party or Stars come to your party.
So they'll tell you, we'll pick you up later. Enjoy the party.
There's a nice outfit and everything.
Okay. All right, next story.
So, onto The Guardian Nigeria, and there's an in-depth article with Tony Abuga, who is a legal advisor to the Nigerian community in Russia. And he's speaking about the plight and situation of Nigerians living in Russia. He said the population of Nigerians there is about 10,000. And he talks about some of the issues that people have been facing there. you know how sometimes people in Nigeria, they have a very idealized view of what life is like abroad, but he's sort of talking about some of the major challenges people face in Russia, which includes racism. There's a trafficking issue that's going on there with young girls being duped into thinking they're going to study abroad and end up being trafficked as sex slaves and prostitutes. And then there was the issue, I'm not sure if you guys remember, with the World Cup, where some people, they got tourist visas and were tricked into thinking that they had been given permits to stay there. So he was just talking about a whole host of issues and just, you know, situations like this, you always wonder, will we ever get to the point where people are not desperately trying to get out of Nigeria by any means possible?
And then go to anywhere.
Exactly.
And that is the conversation. That's the conversation you continue to have everywhere you go. People are just trying to find a way out, and you know that at some point, somewhere else, that's going to become a problem because you obviously want people that are legally in a country, that are able to fend for themselves and also can either learn or speak the language very quickly. And Russian is not an easy language to learn.
Exactly.
This issue of trafficking, there's been a story also going around over the last couple of weeks of a particular place in Paris that is the same thing with Nigerians. So, I mean, the issue of migration and what happens to Nigerian migrants around the world needs to become part of a discussion we're having. And actually, that's something we need to make sure that we ask the candidates if when we get a chance to interview them. And also to creating opportunities here so people don't have to leave so much look to other places.
I mean, some of the really scary stories are when, you know, people have been trafficked and they come back and they say that they still want to try again. And that makes you ask so many questions about what is going on in our country, that someone would go through this horrible journey, experience God knows what in that country, and still be willing to risk to go again. So, yeah, some good questions for you guys to ask when these people...
we need to start, we're making our list.
When they come,
Checking it twice.
So, another sad story, unfortunately, in The Guardian, Nigeria. The deadline that Boko Haram issued on Leah Sharabi's life is hit today. So, The Guardian is asking the question, where is she? And they've done an in-depth article asking the government what is happening, when will she be returned home? Now we've reached the deadline, what happens next? They actually reached out to her father earlier in the week, who said he's been banned from speaking to the media. He didn't say who put that ban on him. But I mean, so many questions now. I mean, this happened in February. There has been an active campaign to get her back, but now we've reached the deadline. Whether or not Boko Haram follow through on that deadline, we don't know.
Nigerians have not been kept in the loop on how these negotiations are going with Boko Haram. And having to ban the parents from speaking to the media, I think it's completely unfair because it's a vehicle in which the parents express themselves. So I think, I mean, basic human rights, you can speak to, so I think that is very unfair. I know that they might say they don't want sensitive information to be leaked out there, but we're talking about the life of a young girl with her parents still alive. And it is a difficult position or situation to live through, knowing that your child could be killed because she did not deny her faith, her Christian faith. So it's a very sensitive matter. I mean, politics is like playing chess. And we talked about the Executive Order 6 that the president just gave and said it was a political move trying to look good for next year. The president has to do it. Exactly. Even if it has to be a political move to get her out, he needs to get her out.
So yeah, we're all praying for her safe release. Hopefully we'll hear some more about that case today, that the press attention on the deadline gets some answers.
We're going to keep her in our prayers and look out for some good news on this case.
So on to The Nation. They have done a story about some Nigerians that are suffering from reading and comprehension challenges. Apparently 32 million Nigerians suffer from issues with regard to learning difficulties. This is a stat given by an NGO called Dyslexia Found, and the chairman of this organisation has said that dyslexia is more endemic than autism and is one of the most common learning disabilities in the world. And given the way that our education system works, you can't help but think how many young people are sort of falling through this gap. If it's a learning disability that people aren't really aware of, it's not a visual disability, so it can be harder to spot. So a lot of children, and this happens in the developed world as well, a lot of children end up falling through the cracks. People will think that, you know, they're just not clever or they don't understand things because they have this
This is where parent engagement means everything.
Absolutely.
Parents need to know what to look out for. Parents need to raise their hand and say, look, this is happening. parents' engagement and also parents accepting that something might be wrong.
Yeah.
That's a big part of
Big part. Yes. And just, again, I think that's so important. And then fusing that into the education system. Yes. How are we going to accommodate these children that have these sort of special needs and making sure that they're able to still fulfill whatever it is they need to fulfill. Final story here from the Daily Trust. And it was a big issue here about the sacking of 15 House of staff from the Voice of America. This was over a $5,000 gift that was allegedly given to them by a delegation from the Katsina governor. So this delegation had gone to the VOA offices in Washington, D.C., and apparently gave a gift of $5,000, which was shared out amongst the House of Staff. And the Voice of America has a very strict policy on gifts that you're able to accept, no more than $20. So when this then came to light, the 15 staff were sacked. Now, the governor of Katsina says he didn't give anybody any money, but these people have been fired. And some people are saying that this is an example of, the brown culture, brown envelope culture that thrives in Nigeria, but that this was a good, the Voice of America had no other choice but to fire these people for violating their policy, which is a shame. I mean, the Voice of America, the House service reaches 20 million people a week. So it's a shame, but yeah.
It's such a shame.
It is a shame.
But I mean, having worked in many organizations, I've worked in nonprofit organizations, I worked in for-profit organizations, the gift policy is very clear. As a CEO, I always make sure my people understand the gift policy, and it is not to be violated. It is sacred in most organizations, and it is not something people put under the table. So when you work for an organization like that, this is not new news. This is not something you're just finding out. Basically, what they thought is they thought they can get away with it, and they couldn't, because with these things, like we said, even with the list, names are still leak out. And so with this type of sharing formula, this is going to happen, and people are going to find out. And I think that Voice of America was swift in its response, because that is what helps you build real institutions. That is what corporate governance is all about. If you start to make excuses, you make more and more excuses. So for me, I feel that these people have learned a very hard lesson. I hope they're very early in their career, because sometimes learning these lessons, these harsh lessons early in your career sets you up for life, because you really start to understand the implications of corporate governance.
Yes, and the fact is, we have a different culture here, as you said. It's the Nigerian culture versus the American culture. When they say this is this, that's the way it is.
But it is the culture everywhere. No, we just don't implement it.
No, the thing about Nigerian brown envelope culture is this. If your employer hasn't paid you for 6 months, and he says don't collect brown envelope, he has lost the moral right to enforce it.
No, sorry, I think we're talking about other things. I think what you said is the American culture is when an American says this is this, then, and Nigeria says this is it, it's not. Yes. But at the end of the day, once corporate governance, and I mean, I have to say this because I am part of the corporate governance world in Nigeria, has been pretty clear, and they have implemented very well. I don't want us to get those mixed up.
No. I'm just saying that why it has thrived in Nigeria is because employers have not been holding them accountable is a big deal.
But those organizations also don't have very strong corporate governance policies. So
they could say it, but enforcing is a problem because they know.
That means they don't have very strong corporate policies, because they're also not being very good corporate citizens. So this is talking about an organization that has been a very good corporate citizen, and I think that we need to make sure that people at home don't get this mixed up, because corporate governance is extremely important. We've had 2 different shows talking about corporate governance here, and I don't want us to get those mixed up. So thank you very much so much for bringing this to light. That's it. That's all the time we have today on the show. Thank you all for being here.